The midterm will stay where it is, unless there's, well, no, it's gonna stay where it is. If it gets moved, then it gets conflicted with some of the other stuff. Because I think it's planned now that it's not in the week with any of your other plans.
So it's on October 17th.
Did we move it to the 17th already? That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to get Dr. Reed here for the 10th. But if not, it'll be, but what we'll probably do until we get Dr. Rescheduled is go ahead and get you started on your case studies next week. And get them issued, get you in your group so you can start working on your presentations. Okay? Awesome. So, ethics in research is what we're going to talk about today. So, research ethics is our guidelines that are basically based in biomedical research. And even though I know all of you are not necessarily interested in going into biomedical research, the issues that are raised there also cross over into a lot of different areas of practice. And so you cannot leave this place without knowing what they are, especially with the significance that Tuskegee has in biomedical research. So I want to make sure that you understand, because as a graduate of Tuskegee, it's going to be, well, it's my wish that you help to dispel some of the wrong information that has been proliferated for many years about what happens here when it comes to biomedical research. But research ethics have been created out of the need to protect human and animal subjects that are involved in the research enterprise. And I say research enterprise because it is very much, has an economic component, and that's the reason why most of it is included. So, okay, my screen is kind of turned over.
There's a little box to the right.
It's been
If you
very,
mess with it funny, it changes.
Yeah, don't tap it.
We
Oh,
do-
you don't touch, okay, don't touch it.
Yeah, we
Okay, great. So, what is the basis of the ethical tenets that we have in biomedical research? Well, to start in the early 1940s to late 1940s, everybody know what happened with the Holocaust in the Jewish concentration camps, so we don't have to have that little history lesson. Well, what came out of that are the doctors' trials that happened as a part of the Nuremberg trials for the Nazi war criminals following World War II. And the German Nazi physicians accused of atrocities during the experiments with the concentration camp inmates used as their defense that there was no international law regarding medical instrumentation, and therefore it was their position that this international court had no grounds or basis by which they could actually hold them accountable for what they did under Hitler's regime. Well, the international court felt differently, and they did sentence them, although it was not based upon violations of ethical tenets. It was really based on more criminal statutes that were available to them. And the outcome were that there were 23 defendants, 7 were acquitted, 7 were given a death sentence, and 9 were sentenced to 10 years in life. And that was based upon what was able to be established about their role in the leadership and the implementation of the different types of research that was conducted in the concentration camps. But what came out of that, other than the actual sentencing of the physician, was that actually the international community got together and developed 10 ethical guidelines for conducting research. And so these are the early precursors to what we now know as the rules in biomedical research. And these 10 are as follows. Subjects must give voluntary consent. This was an early form of informed consent. It is not as stringent as what we'll talk about a little bit later. But it was this notion that people that are involved in research should give their consent as to what's happening to them. The second thing is research must contribute to the good of society. And that's an early form of benevolence that we talked about earlier in the semester. So it can't just be because you're interested. You think it might be a cool question to answer. It has to have some benefit to society. Research must be based on sound theory and animal testing. So there must be animal models that have demonstrated the basis for the theory in human experimentation. You must avoid unnecessary suffering. Avoid serious injury or death as possible outcomes. And as you know, if you're familiar with some of the experimentation that happened there, many of the experiments were actually carried out to the point of death. And their intent was to see at what point would they die. So they were very clear about their intent or the lack of concern about serious injury or death. The risk cannot exceed the potential benefit. So you have to establish that there is a potential benefit to society that will exceed any potential risk to individuals involved in the research. Also, there has to be some protection of participants. And that is a lot more, it's a very great area. And it has, as it has gotten more well defined, what that really is going to help us about what are vulnerable populations. So there are certain groups of people that actually require you taking extra steps to ensure that they are protected in research, like children, or prisoners or inmates inside of the federal or state correction system. The research must be conducted by qualified researchers. Subjects can discontinue participation at any time. That was a huge part of what was a problem with the experiments in the Nazi concentration camps because they were prisoners. They did not have the ability to either opt in or decide, hey, I don't want to be involved. And that is something that did come out of the Nuremberg Code. And also, the experiment must be discontinued if it is found to be more harmful than beneficial. Okay, so those are the 10 codes that came out of the Nuremberg doctor trials, and they're now referenced as the Nuremberg Code, and they're considered the precursor for biomedical research. So, around that same time, the World Medical Association were thinking about these issues as well, and based upon what happened during the doctors' trials, as well as the codes that came out of Nuremberg, the Helsinki Declaration still found there need to be some more language to ensure that these biomedical rules were followed around the world in a uniform way. And so the Helsinki Declaration came around the same time. It contains all the elements of the Nuremberg Code that we just discussed, but it also adds further guidelines for additional protection of human research subjects. It required that there be an independent investigator's review of potential research project, which was early precursors to what we know now as the IRB, or Institutional Review Boards. It also added guidelines for research with children and obtaining informed consent. So now that we have the Nuremberg Code, we have the Helsinki Declaration, all of these are international guidelines that have been signed on by most major countries that are involved in biomedical research, definitely signed on by the United States. So what could go wrong? That seems to cover pretty much everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Should be a pretty good guideline on what you should and should not do. Never that easy. And we also have to take in consideration that we in these United States tend to be very good at saying what other people should do, but we don't necessarily think that that applies to us. So again, these were all international codes, and we signed on to them. So legally, we were bound to them just like any other country who had signed. But from 1932, interestingly enough, while we were signing the Nuremberg, not signing on to the guidelines of Nuremberg Code and Helsinki Declaration. The U.S. Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male was actually ongoing at that same time. So who can tell me what happened in the U.S. Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male? Yes, sir. I'm sorry? It wasn't Tuskegee. Yes, ma'am.
I don't want to get the story wrong, but from what I remember, I think they had a group of black
You
men.
speak up. She
Oh.
can't hear you in that
I
corner.
don't want to get the story wrong, but from what I remember, they had a group of black men come in and to Tuskegee here on campus, bioethics building. It was a hospital back then, and I forget why the men believed they were there, but they did not know what was going to happen this week. So they were there, and they gave them syphilis, and they did not.
Well, that is definitely one of the misconceptions of the study. I want to be very clear. Nobody was given syphilis here in this place. Okay? That did not happen.
Okay.
Hand it back.
Didn't they had the cure, but they didn't give it out to these men, and they just watched, they documented the actual, clinical signs and everything like that.
Well, in 1932, penicillin had not been recognized as a cure, so when this program started, there was no cure available. And actually, what they thought to be a treatment was provided to the men. So that's not exactly true, too. Now, once it became accepted that penicillin was the actual cure, these men were denied that treatment. But when it started, there was no known treatment that would deal with syphilis. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
That's diagnosed. Records have been shown that there has been high school, they prosecute for an effect on the system. However, they also did find that those that were already infected, they just simply didn't tell them and didn't provide what was thought to be the treatment of the time or offer it any kind of treatment. Not only was that true, they allowed people to go home with their lives and expect to be better.
Well, let me back you up a step and give you let's do a little U.S. history. What happened, well, prior to the early 30s, the Rosenwald family, which were big philanthropists, you got a building over there named after them. They were doing this demonstration project, not only in Macon County, but in the United States. There were several of them across the country. And this demonstration project was set up because it was known that syphilis was actually, the incidence of it, which is the number of new cases, had started to rise dramatically. And that was demonstrated in these demonstration programs when they actually went into communities and just tested people. Again, a lot of different places all over the country. They tested people to see what was the burden in the population, what was the prevalence of syphilis at that time. And so Macon County was one of the sites for those demonstration projects. And what they had available as treatment were mercury rubs, all things that were kind of topical and clearly were not addressing the underlying problem. Now, what they did do that was not so ethical is that once these men were found to have syphilis, they used terminology that is very questionable as to whether or not they truly understood the significance of what the disease that they had. They told them they had bad blood. And that was in an effort to, once the physician gave this clinical description of the diagnosis, the nurses that were there, that were working in the community at the time, kind of translated that clinical diagnosis to something they felt that the individuals could more readily understand. And they told them from having sex, that they had contracted this bug that went sleeping in their body and was doing things to them, and they may not have symptoms or they may have symptoms. And it could come back and start to make them have problems like blindness, inability to walk, neurological problems, lose their mind. What's not clear was whether or not they were given very clear instruction about how they might be transmitting it to family members and other people that they were having sex with. But to be clear, when this demonstration project started, this was going on around the entire country. So why is it that if this demonstration project was happening, probably like 10 to 12 different locations around the country, why was Macon County selected for the U.S. Public Health Service Study of Untreated Syphilis? Because again, the Rosenwald Foundation was a non-governmental organization that's doing this demonstration project because it was well known across the country that this was an issue, that the incidence was running rampant across the U.S. There were television ads, there were billboard campaigns talking about syphilis and how it was being spread. So why did U.S. Public Health Service choose Macon County out of all the different places? Yes, ma'am.
I mean, I feel like Tuskegee, Alabama is a very rural town. I highly doubt they had the resources to know about these ads, about syphilis and all of the ways that you can contract it. And on top of that, the demographics. I mean, even when you go to the CDC's website, they say that they chose Tuskegee because of the Black population, because they wanted to see the disease progression in that particular demographic.
That is very much partially true.
Good job, Monty.
Very much partially true. The reason why the ethnicity was important was mostly important to the Black physicians that was here. What I do want to dispel, and for you not to believe, is that Macon County was chosen because it was poor and uneducated. Remember, we had the Tuskegee University here. Every Black physician and nurse or health professional that was trained up until the mid-70s was trained right here. So when it came to Black intellectual thought in the health profession, it was all right here, because there was no other place where they could be trained in the United States. So every physician, every African-American physician, veterinarian, any type of medical professional, if they had a residency, they rotated through Tuskegee, Alabama. So it wasn't because we were so uneducated. In actuality, it was because what happened in the early 30s? U.S. history. Great Depression. Absolutely. So you had this Rosenwald Fund, these philanthropists were putting in this money to go out and provide what treatment they thought science was telling them at the time would be useful in this disease, but their money dried up. So all these demonstration all this extra money that people had to do these types of projects in the community went away. And the U.S. Public Health Service decided, well, we don't have money for treatment, but what we have here is an opportunity for a natural experiment. What's a natural experiment? It's an observation of what's going to occur naturally in a population or in nature without you touching it. You just watch it. And the reason this was important, especially to the Black medical establishment that was here, what was the major scientific thought during that time when it came to race? I hear mumbling, I don't know what you're saying. Darwinism. That Blacks were inherently inferior. It was just because you were Black that you had some type of propensity to get sick from sexually transmitted diseases, and also that you had an uncontrollable propensity to be sexually promiscuous. That was accepted in the literature. There are lots of studies around that time that was saying this. And so the black medical establishment was willing to participate because they thought that this was an opportunity, because there was a study that had happened in Oslo on all white men. And it had already described the full sequelae of syphilis as it progressed in the human body. But it was all white men. And so this was an opportunity to show that scientifically, this disease behaved the exact same way in black people. That was the original thought for this natural experiment when it began in 1932. And the reason why Macon County was chosen is because, anybody remember the talk that Booker T. Washington gave around in the early 30s in American history? It's one of the most famous speeches he ever made. At the Atlanta Cotton Expedition. Well, to truncate this history lesson, in that speech, Booker T. Washington laid out a plan by which the race could be joined in everything economic and occupational, but separate as the fingers when it came to social interaction. That got him some support from some people in the white community, but what it really did, it made it very clear of the economic development that was already occurring here in Tuskegee University. Did you know that the educational system that had been set up by the faculty here in Tuskegee is now set the framework for what